become the world's largest business software company, where today 74% of the world's transaction revenues touch an SAP system. And while our customers represent 86% of the Fortune 500 companies, in actual fact, 75% of our revenues come from small and medium-sized enterprises with less than $1 billion in revenue. So now, while SAP is traditionally known for running the back office, for example, we actually have the world's largest global business network called Ariba, which has over 1.6 million connected companies from 191 countries that are trading and collaborating on over $600 billion worth of commerce annually. Now think about that for a second. That's almost 7 times the combined revenue of eBay and Amazon combined being traded through SAP's Ariba network in the cloud today. So about three years ago, SAP launched a real-time data platform called HANA. Within sports in particular, we now have over 50 million sports fans a week that are accessing sports facts that are running in the HANA platform. And we've built a powerful situational analysis tool, consumer-driven websites, and in fact, mobile apps for folks like the NBA, the NFL, and the Women's Tennis Association. And in fact, even the sports announcers are using these insights to add more details play-by-play. So actually, during the FIFA World Cup earlier this year in Brazil, the German soccer team were actually able to use big data to capture each and every game that was played in the tournament. And all the players' movements were tracked throughout the games using cameras in each stadium and other situational analysis tools to help the German players understand more about their opponents, their tactics and their strategies, which ultimately led to them winning the FIFA World Cup. Same with the Women's Tennis Association, where SAP's HANA is actually used by those players to gain competitive insights. So the next time that you see Serena Williams' coach speaking to her between the games, bear in mind that they're probably reviewing insights and data provided to them by our real-time data platform. But we've also powered online games such as Battlestar Galactica, where offers are presented to users in real time based upon their skills and their player behaviors within the game. So we might touch on a bit of that today. And we also have an interesting solution called Consumer Insights 365 or CI 365, which actually holds petabytes of mobile data and information, what time of day that you most often send text messages, what apps do you use most, what are you searching for in Google, and all that information is stored in a HANA repository that enables marketers to better target ads to you. So for example, if you're driving towards the Golden Gate Bridge, headed towards San Francisco, the digital billboard at the entrance to the bridge is able to scan the area and use predictive algorithms to determine what is best to put on that billboard. Based upon who's approaching the bridge. So let's say it's predominantly males aged between 35 and 55 with incomes over 300,000 a year, at least they will be if they live in that part of the world. So they might run the Rolex ad on that billboard based upon the people that are actually physically present. And finally, I wanted to share a quick use case within the television world where SAP is this really cool technology called Hybrid Stream. And it lets you embed a signal into your video program so that you can actually drive relevant information from the television to the second screen, such as your smartphone or your tablet. So with big data being the buzzword for the marketers for the last few years, we're going to help bust some myths and bring some clarity to you today. So to help us with that, I'd like to welcome each of our distinguished panelists to Digital Hollywood and ask them if they don't mind introducing themselves, telling us who they work for, what they do for their company, and if they can also tell us how your company is driving the big data revolution for digital marketing. So I'll start immediately to my left.
Oh. Well, I was told that this panel desperately needed a white male over 30. So I wanted to make sure I filled that quota. I'm Vincent Brzezzi. I'm CEO of C4. Our firm is a market research and consultation firm that works with the entertainment industry. So we do everything from very early stage, helping financial institutions, whether or not they're going to make their investment into a script or a film or a TV show, up through production and using data as well into marketing. And for us, the big challenge is always that, the very cold connotation of the words big data and statistics, and then the creative realm of Hollywood and how those two mesh together. So, it's very important for us to work with the creative side of the industry and use data to inform decisions and to predict what the market's going to do without it being seen as antagonistic to those decisions. Obviously, the more you go to the financial side or the marketing side, the less antagonistic it feels, and the more you are towards the production and creative side, the more there's pushback, and it's working sort of in that intersection of commerce and art that our firm works with every day.
Great, thank you, Vincent. Alex?
I don't know where I fit. I think, I think I am above 30. Yeah, absolutely. Good afternoon, everyone. Alex Manella from PwC. Was one of the founders of our analytics practice. And for those of you who don't know PwC, one side of it is a big, very large, old audit firm. Another side of it is advisory that has been growing substantially through several acquisitions. And I was one of those acquisitions about 4 or 5 years ago from a firm called Diamond Management and Technology. And we were chatting a little bit before the panel. I came out of a think tank early in my career, and this whole idea of big data I thought was really cool when I was sitting at a computer one night late in Chicago, overlooking the Thanksgiving parade. And I was looking at emails, and I was writing some scripts to build some algorithms for a marketing campaign for Mercedes-Benz. And I thought, wow, how cool it is. I was able to decompose an email and create independent variables and build that into a regression. I'm really, this is cool, right? And now you hear what we're doing today. It's incredibly compelling. So as part of the firm, I still help lead our analytics practice, and certainly within the entertainment and media space, we find our clients asking us several questions around, as I think about acquisition and cross-sell and upsell, as I think about content valuation and customer experience, and with all the proliferation of data and tools and technology out there, how do we think through that, and how do we solve some very specific business problems? So that's where I find myself, and our firm finds ourselves in this space, and I look forward to the conversation today. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Rich?
Hey, Rich Morosky, everyone, and I work for IBM, and a lot of people talk about IBM, and I always say there was your dad's IBM, which everybody's heard of, but what a lot of people don't know is that in the last, I would say, 5 to 7 years, IBM spent, just a little bit, probably in the area of $15 billion to acquire technology and tool companies in the big data and advanced analytics space to take kind of a leading position in that area from a tools perspective. We also have a big data advanced analytics practice, and that's all good and well, but the issue is once you come down to speak to people like you, TV networks and movie studios and publishers and ad agencies, you actually need to be able to apply this technology in context to do the things that we just mentioned. So I am our solutions leader, and I work a lot on developing prototypes and doing proof of concepts using all our different technology and even with other technology partners to actually build applications that you use. And I think, and we'll probably talk about them today, and we might semantically characterize them differently, but there are kind of 4 buckets of projects I think the industry's focused on. One we'll call audience profiling. And so that's literally pulling together all different types of unstructured and structured data to actually build these things that you guys probably heard called 360-degree profiles, right? It's important for ad sales. It's important for marketing. And that's kind of one bucket of stuff. The next bucket of stuff is what we'll call fan engagement. So understanding how fans and your audience is engaged in different types of content and how that changes and trends over time. The third would be targeting, which we just mentioned, which could be targeting for recommendations or personalization. It could be for ad targeting. And then lastly, I think the really cool stuff is around forecasting and demand forecasting, whether that be for ad inventory optimization or forecasting box office or forecasting ratings, Nielsen ratings for upfronts, so you can sell in a little bit later in the process. So the point is, it's how you apply the technology and the actual applications and use cases. I think that's going to be the most interesting thing. And all the big data and technology stuff, it can be a little overwhelming, but that's what I guess we're all here to help you guys with. So,
thank you, Richard. Brandon?
Sure. So I'm Brandon Harness. I have the privilege of having one of the sexiest titles at Adobe of the evangelist. And I always follow that up with some legitimacy by saying I'm on the product management team for Adobe. And really what that means is I spend about half of my time as a product manager helping guide the product roadmap for the marketing cloud. So we have 2 clouds, marketing cloud and creative cloud. On the marketing cloud side, just kind of really how do we pull all these technologies together? We've been in a mode of building out the data side of the equation. We've always owned the creative side of the equation of creating compelling content and, what do we do with this content? And really over the last I guess 5, 6 years now, Adobe's been focused on the marketing side of it, the data side of it. How do we monetize that creative? How do we understand we're creating the right creative, and how do we understand and make sure that we're delivering the right creative to the right person at the right time? Adobe, from a big data perspective, we collect a lot of transactions for our customers. I think last year was about 17 trillion transactions that we collected on behalf of our customers. And by our definition, a transaction is every time a consumer interacts with a digital property, whether that's web, mobile, whatever it may be, a payload of information is sent into Adobe. Payload saying what's the IP address, the geolocation, what are they looking at, what keywords did they come home. A large payload of information is collected. And each one of those 17 trillion transactions, this was last year, is an opportunity to monetize that interaction, to personalize that creative and driving a meaningful experience. So big data to us is on one side collecting that data and making it easy to ingest and digest that data by the marketer, and then the other side of it is making sure that you're able to take action on that data and making it easy for you to take action on that data.
Great. Thanks, Brendan. Last but not least, Rob.
Yeah, hi. My name's Rob Gable. I'm founder and CEO of a company called Tubular Labs in Mountain View. And we're not quite the same scale as some of the companies here. We're just under 30 people. And what we do is we take the big data and we focus it specifically by providing software that is the most widely used analytics and marketing software to help people grow in online video, with a focus on YouTube. And so similar to what they've talked about today, our software, we track 10 billion likes and comments on YouTube, tweets about YouTube videos from 150 million people on 760 million videos. And we track all that. We synthesize it so that people can find out what kind of content is successful, who are the YouTube influencers I need to contact, how do I improve my ad targeting, and then what we have software that you can just use yourself. So there's no kind of integration. We also provide free software to about 3,000 YouTubers that reach about 3.5 billion views a month. So very similar to what the gentlemen here are doing, but in a very specific niche, which is the online video.
Cool. Thanks, Rob.
Thank you.
So we could probably spend a week talking about the various facets of the big data ecosystem, but companies out there like Axiom, they know not only that you eat bran flakes for your breakfast cereal, they also know your propensity to whether you buy Kellogg's or generic brand. And in fact, in Friday's New York Times, I saw an article talking about a new category emerging called vulnerability-based marketing, where lists of consumers are being sold with profiles such as nearsightedness for a dime, casual smoker for 10 plus years is about 12 cents, balding slowly, interesting, was 19 cents, and an impulse buyer was 64 cents, and so on. So where does this take us? You know, can brands build their own customer profiles? Is it rich enough? Or will they need to complete the customer 360, as I think Rich said, with this kind of unvetted, in cases, third-party information, whether it's social or from these companies building these lists? Can the two views be stitched together, or multiple views? You know, Brandon, can you talk first about you know, what this means from an architectural perspective, both from a multi-channel view as well as integrating data with third-party vendors? And of course, I would say this, but you can feel free to plug the partnership we have with Adobe and SAP.
Sure. So I mean, the end goal of all of this is we want to deliver a relevant experience to the consumer. You know, and backing that up, you know, at Adobe, the way we look at it is, you know, our background in big data was the Site Catalyst product, which was formerly Omniture, who we acquired in 2009. You know, and it was all about the behavioral data. And what are these populations of people doing? What actions are they taking? But we understand that, you know, that's not all of the behavioral data, or that's not all of the data about the profile that we need to be able to pull together. So, you know, to be able to deliver that personalized, relevant experience, we need to pull in their behavioral data. You know, we need to pull in CRM data. We need to pull in third-party data and social data. And so part of it from an architectural perspective is making sure that, you know, as we architect these big data systems, and particularly as it relates to a profile, making sure that that profile is open-ended, it has RESTful APIs against it to where we can ingest third-party data and you know, social data, and use all of this to understand that consumer. And you know, one of the things that we've done and announced recently with SAP is using the HANA platform, is being able to pull in, using HANA, that real-time CRM type data. And as let's say a simple example, when a web page loads, you know, being able to corral all of this profile information, behavioral information from analytics, you know, CRM type data from the SAP HANA platform. It could be weather conditions based on a reverse IP lookup of your geolocation, pulling all of that information in and having that single view of the consumer, and then using that to make a decision around what type of an experience to deliver. And, you know, the key to that architecture of all of this is it has to perform within about 300 milliseconds. So we need to compile all of this information. We need to understand, we need to predict the experience, we need to assemble the experience, and then we need to adapt the experience to the type of device they're using. So it has to be very high performant, which is one of the great things about the HANA platform.
Thank you, Brendan. Rich, should you get any?
Yeah, I would just say that, I would say M&E, and again, not knowing if everybody is more on the business side or ad sales side, the media and entertainment industry has generally been has relied heavily, with the exception of websites and digital media companies. But if you think broadcast TV, if you think publishers, heavily reliant on third-party data sources and analytics, so Acxiom, Experian, to basically do marketing campaigns or to provide data. And I think the big sea change here has been, all the TV Anywhere applications where you use Adobe Omniture or IBM Core Metrics, whatever you use to collect the data. But when you think about all these digital and video applications that are exploding, now M&E companies have what we call first-party data, right? You now can start to understand the behavior of your customer on your applications, and that's critical, because I think actually first-party data has been under-leveraged by M&E relative, if you think of retail banks or retail companies or consumer product companies that are rich in first-party data. So really the power is starting to build out assets and applications to collect and analyze and do predictive stuff and do segmentation stuff on your digital data. And then how do you cross the chasm and then start to use some of these like Nielsen data for live TV or other data and integrate these additional data sources. But I think the critical point to take away here is that M&E companies need to start owning data about their customers and their audience. TV networks, if you talk to broadcasters, the CTOs and the CIOs from years past will tell you, and even the CMOs, audience, who cares about audience? I just care about Nielsen ratings, right? That's an arm's length relationship. That is completely changing, right? So M&E companies in a lot of ways are going to have to become more like retail companies and own that relationship, not just to own it for the sake of owning it, because it can give you this rich set of data, which you can extract from social, which you can extract from clickstream, from web applications to understand what people are watching, right? And combine all this, which you can enrich with Acxiom data, who has a profile on you since the beginning of time of what you own and what your demographics are. So your advertisers can, and integrate this stuff and build it into a shared data repository, an application that your ad sales people and your audience research people can use, right? And that's the critical sea change, to have the business people and the IT people push for this.
Rob, I mean, you mentioned about YouTube. I mean, that was a kind of walled garden for insights. So, that's truly unique what you guys are doing with Tubular. So can you talk a little bit more about how that works?
Yeah, it is a walled garden, and there isn't any good way to tie in YouTube channel users, the 150 million we have, to to offline profiles. That being said, it's actually still quite valuable. For example, knowing the videos that are 50 times more likely to be engaged with by people who own a dog, and targeting those videos as content through like TubeMogul or something like that allows you to target YouTube mobile app ad views where no pixel will work and none of this data will work. So there's always going to be areas that are off the grid a little bit, the Wild West, where some of the industry rules don't apply. But I think everything they said is true, and an amazing theme as it relates to YouTube is media entertainment companies going direct to consumers, and you're seeing it now with OTT and CBS and HBO, and so getting to know those people and marketing to them and getting them to your into your direct relationship is exciting. It's kind of what happened to the consumer electronics companies. In the 90s, they sold to Best Buy and they had no idea who's buying their stuff. Now you have a website, you sell direct, and you learn so much more. It's the same thing is happening, but it's happening 20 years later for media entertainment.
And I would just like to jump in and say, that actually there is a way to leverage YouTube data and other data sources. There's a technology called entity analytics or entity resolution, which means an entity could be a person. And so if I know your YouTube username or user handle, and I have other location data, other sorts of data, there are ways to actually resolve that with a first-party CRM profile that you might have in your database, right, as a TV provider, because I have my TV Anywhere app. And you can, not in all cases, but using algorithms, you can start to match these profiles, and then you can start to stitch together for a certain percentage of your total CRM database, a really rich set of profiles. And then the good thing about that is, with your company, you can start collecting that data over time and using that as a third-party source to enrich your profile. So it's kind of the front end of cutting edge technology. It's not working perfectly yet, but I've worked on project where that absolutely is done. And then effectively, that's what Axiom does and these third-party providers do. The question is, when are the networks themselves and the studios themselves going to start doing this and or continue to rely on third-party companies to do that?
Right. So that's actually a good point. So although we don't sync just our entire database with anything offline. Yeah, if you've got an app and you've got YouTubers connecting to your app and authenticating their account, then we can talk, definitely.
Yeah,
I think that also brings up a really good point, and I kind of hope we're at the beginning of this tipping point where, in the past, and I think we've all been in the internet space for so long, there's been really great innovations within silos. There's been really great innovations within social media, or really great innovations within this area, or great innovations within this area. But there's always been that walled garden, with that profile. There's a profile for analytics. There's a profile for your social channels. There's a profile for your optimization channels. And I think that we're really early on, and I think I'm hoping it's going to start continuing to gain steam, but where these technologies and these silos are starting to break down, and where there's really great things going on in, let's say, social spaces, but those great things are also being built with APIs and access to ingest data and push data out into a broader ecosystem, a broader platform. I mean, at Adobe, of course, we're building this ecosystem and making open architecture, but we know that not everybody's going to use all of our Adobe solutions. So, we're kind of hopeful that we're seeing the trend of, the social companies that are innovating and doing great things are building with an open architecture to where we can tap into that, or they can tap into our data stream to use all of that to build that complete profile of the consumer.
So, you mentioned standards there, Brandon. I mean, is standards, like there's a de facto standard in the industry of Nielsen, that's the measurement, but they're not a voted and, board member elected standard that just became the standard there. I mean, what happens in digital? Is there the IAB did it for setting ads and banners and all that stuff, but does the industry, because it involves broadcast, who is the entity that would look at it? Is it an Adobe that would help drive that?
I mean, I think there's certain responsibility for the large vendors. I mean, whether it's in IBM or SAP or anybody up here to be able to have that responsibility of creating those standards and building that open architecture. I mean, I think you talked a lot about the Nielsen standards and things like that. You might have some.
Yeah, well, there's technology standards, and then if folks here in TV, which I assume a few of you are, there's audience measurement standards, right? So we as technology companies can help you, build your own audience measurement platform for your network, right? So if you're a website, you can measure your own stuff with Adobe. But how do you get the whole industry? How do you do a neutral measurement on TV audience, right? So that's where Nielsen jumps in, or in the digital side, a ComScore would jump in, right, to do websites. But the issue is how do you do that? So there's a standards issue, a larger standard issue when it comes to audience measurement broadly to look across networks. Because if I'm Procter & Gamble or Coke, and I'm going to go make an ad buy in one of the networks, you can give me this really wonderful audience profiling app you have showing me why your audience over indexes to, some of my products, but it's not a neutral sort of data provider, right? So then one of the big ecosystem questions is, whether it's Nielsen, whether it's the cable companies getting together, whether it's technology companies partnering with some of these companies, there has to be like a multi-channel live TV digital sort of measurement as one example, right? And so there's a lot of these ecosystem challenges which gets in the way of kind of moving forward on a lot of these things sometimes. Yep.
So, okay, so sticking on the audience measurement, big data provides insights into consumers that's literally light years beyond anything that we've seen. You mentioned about, broadcasters just didn't care in the past. Yet, reality check is that digital is still less than 10% of the advertising pie when you look at the overall advertising revenues of a broadcaster, such as one of my former employers. So, yet broadcasters are sitting on net operating margins of 50% or higher, where TV still commands 90% of the ad revenue. So, meanwhile, 20% of US households have actually become cord cutters. They've disconnected. You mentioned earlier about HBO and CBS, so when will the pendulum swing? It literally started last week swinging? Are CBS and HBO finally waking up to the fact that they can now see more than a river of nickels from the internet? Is that what this is about? Or will the CPMs become more valuable given the deep and rich profiles that you can get from those digital insights? What's it going to take to swing the pendulum from that 90% Nielsen-led price set to the digital being, you know, the bigger side of the pie. I mean, at the moment, it's 20% of people have got the televisions off, but, you know, in a year's time, is it going to be 50%? You know, when do we kind of deal with the problem, or is it just going to continue to erode?
Well, I think, well, one, you're going to need more effective metrics to prove out an ROI on online, even ad spends. I mean, and two, there needs, I mean, the problem with predictive science is everyone tries to jump the gun on predictive science, and then you see all these articles light up everywhere. I mean, just 2 weeks ago, there were articles all over the place before the premiere of The Walking Dead premiere season 5 that said online social buzz and interaction with Walking Dead was down 13% year over year from the premiere season 4. And then season 5 premieres and it has 1 million more viewers than season 4 premiered. Well, things like that do not encourage content, people who distribute and make content to start to believe the metrics that are online. And the problem is everyone tries to think, oh, I have a prediction and I can monetize this, and I'm going to go out and I'm going to say, oh, this is what's happening online. And then it turns out it doesn't work out, and then people don't believe it. And then you only have a first chance to make a first impression, right? So it takes a while to get over that. So until that there are significant metrics, and I'm not saying that the current metrics for TV, I mean, we all just saw Nielsen screw up, right? I mean, that wasn't fun. But, you know, there is billions and billions and billions of dollars dedicated to keeping TV ad buys, for example, in business. And that means there are also billions of dollars dedicated to making sure that those metrics prove what that money wants it to prove. And sure, we all know that right now, you know, if you were to devise a marketing campaign, or if you were to figure out where to distribute platform, it would get more than 10% on digital. But you'd have to prove that case. And right now, the metrics aren't there at this point to prove the case.
Yeah, just to piggyback on this, and also on this whole first party, third party. So certainly on the metrics and kind of being more on the quant side, the one thing I always kind of preach to our clients is statistical significance and practical significance. And, you know, you can have all different types of metrics and KPIs kind of floating out there, but what's the believability, and how does that morph itself or manifest itself to the customer, and how do they evolve through their life stages, and how do you interact with them? So first on the whole first party piece and the challenges it has from a modeling perspective, you have this big shift in the industry where you have this very well kind of structured third party data that's out there. Then this first party data, well, it causes fundamental changes in how you think you gather that data, how you ask for that data, how you standardize that data, then filter it into a model to say I've become intimate with you. And then I actually believe that, and I can now flow you through a solid business model and say this is what an ROI looks like for this group of consumers. So certainly from the modeling perspective, it's an additional challenge, but I think what we are saying, and I believe we set it down here, is that we are at the beginning of a 20-25 year trend. And I'm on a project right now where we're asking that exact question, is saying, when does our portfolio hit that tipping point? And what are the decisions that we need to make from a data perspective, from an organization perspective, from a quant perspective, and most of all, a customer perspective? And how does that change us as an organization to break down the silos to work more efficiently together? So at its core, a couple main things around the metrics and the data and the analysis, but fundamentally changing how some of these organizations have been set up over the past several years.
Mm-hmm. So. Yeah. Any other comments on it?
I just have one comment. You know, when you talked about where does the revenue catch up with digital? I mean, it's video advertising is the future of digital advertising. There's just no doubt. I have a friend at Google who's like, look, let's take search advertising off the table because we own that. He works at Google, but it's true. He's like, within social, video advertising is going to drive all the growth of advertising in social. Look at, you know, online video is going to drive banner ads. I think it's American Express won't even do a banner ad campaign unless video is tied to it. And online video advertising gets pretty strong CPMs today already. You know, Hulu's charging 35 to 40. I have a friend who buys remnant cable at $7-8. That's what remnant YouTube's going to cost you. There is an issue around monetization though, which is global video, if you own the rights, is in 180 countries overnight. Not one country, right? So the reach is gigantic, but does create a massive monetization problem around, you know, Salesforce and these types of things. So while TV is still superior with reach, I think the CPMs look good in online video, and online video is just growing like gangbusters. And there's innovations like skippable ads, and so online video is gonna be the solution to the digital issue. And everyone's just watching more video on their phones and connected TVs every day.
I saw a stat that said it was something like 50 times. If you do a Google search, you're 50 times more likely to click the video than anything else on the page. So I think that you're absolutely right. Did you want to say something?
Yeah, I was just going to say, and also it depends on the country and it depends on the ecosystem in the country. I just completed a proof of concept with a quad play IPTV provider. And if you don't know what that means this company owns TV to your home. They own broadband. They own your mobile device service. And what's the fourth one? I don't know. I guess phone or whatever. Yeah. And so the point is, this company also being in the Middle East did not have as much of a data privacy issue, which I'm sure we'll get to here in a second. And so what they wanted to do is deliver one-to-one targeted video ads across the different platforms. And so we have location data from your cell device and your Wi-Fi network. We have all the information that you watch on your set-top box at home. We have, they can do a thing called deep packet inspection, which is any website you search on, underneath the covers can identify all the URLs that you go to. Some of the companies like Google are encrypting these things now, but for the most part, you can identify URLs. So you think about all your search behavior, all your video consumption behavior, all your location and movement behavior. So what retailers are you going to? Are you going to a soccer stadium? What stores you're going to? When are you home? When are you not? We're able to build models on the audience where against an ad inventory system, you can do decisions on what ad to play dynamically against what somebody's watching, or even send targeted ads to a mobile phone, right? Because they know all that information on you as an individual, right? And so in that ecosystem, online video or digital video, because it's all digital, and all the, let's say, out-of-home advertising opportunities are going to scale up as much more interesting to the advertisers, because there's one standard effectively in that country, and they have like 80% of the market, right, for IPTV. So that's just a very small case, but to the point that, in the right ecosystem, you can scale.
This is a little aside, but just the mobile data is incredibly spooky. If you know where I go every single day, 24 hours, they go to a school, but they go to a spa. So there's probably a woman there with a mom, and they shop at Target, but they don't like Walmart. They just started shopping at Walmart. It's incredible that data. I don't have access to any of it, but it's just a brave new world. It did not exist 5 years ago.
You can infer a lot from movement. No. Yes.
I also think that there's a psychological pendulum that needs to swing from the consumer perspective, in that, if you think right now, if you saw something, and I come, let's say, from the theatrical space, so I'll talk movies for a second. If you saw a movie advertised on a TV commercial, and then you saw the trailer in the movie theater, and you saw outdoor billboards, and then let's say you're watching Ellen and you saw one of the stars on Ellen, but you never saw anything online, you might still think it's actually a fairly big movie. Now reverse it. Let's say you saw a movie that was only advertised online, but you didn't see anything on TV. You didn't really see any outdoor, and you didn't see anybody on Ellen, but it was only online. Is it still a big movie in your mind? See, and so that's exactly right. That's when the pendulum swings, because right now, online and digital is still seen as being supportive to the other forms of advertisement, that it's there to bolster it, but it doesn't drive it. That alone by itself, it cannot drive significant. And when I mean significant, I'm talking $100 million, $50 million opening, huge opening. It cannot drive significant audience, but it's in combination with everything else. That you can have everything else without digital. It's not great, but you can do it. You can't have digital without everything else. And that's what you need to have the pendulum to swing, is that mindset.
Yeah, just to piggyback on that, and I think when you think about that pendulum, and certainly where we're at from the capability in the world we live in for analytics now, you can start to ask these questions and build these types of models with imperfect data. But one of the things that we certainly get all the time is how much data is too much data, right? How do I start thinking about what's the right amount of data for me that allows me to make these types of decisions? And that's the other cool part that, well, folks like myself get excited about on the quant side is that where technology and processing and mathematics has evolved over the past 10 to 15 years. We can do things now and ask those questions to simulate an environment or a network. I don't mean a broadcast network. What I mean by that is a consumer network and how they'll behave. And you pull levers in those models that you would once think were big levers, but you really, when you calculate the network effect on that, it's not what you thought it was. And as you start to be able to model that type of behavior, that's incredibly compelling against the backdrop of the right data and the KPIs and metrics. So, yeah.
Sure. And so what does that mean from you talked earlier about fan engagement or, an actionability perspective, as consumer sentiment really does change so quickly, these days, especially online, marketers need to be able to take a quick and decisive action on that data. I mean, eBay talked about, using again our memory stuff, they talked about how they wanted to actually make a decision while the person was still on the site, not look at it a month later and say, hey, there was someone on the site last month that, and that literally is what they're shifting from just now. So, Brandon, I mean, Adobe's got some stuff in this area again, and everyone else, please feel free to chime in, but, sentiment and engagement, what's happening?
So we're in a unique position because as we've built out the marketing cloud, we have technologies and solutions going from the acquisition side, social and paid advertising to, the engagement side and predicting behavior and, delivering content and then measuring content. So we kind of touch all aspects of the consumer across those channels. And, from the privacy, or I guess if I'm understanding the question correctly, from a regulation or privacy perspective.
No, we're not going into that yet. Yeah, I'm just talking about the the engagement. What can be done. Rob mentioned that he can tell you how many people watched a video on YouTube, but can you get into the information about what they said to it? I know it's more difficult on YouTube than it is perhaps on the blogosphere.
Yeah, and I think one of the comments earlier was I forget the entire phrase, but it was how much data. And I think the term how much data is really perspective depending on where you are within the organization. I mean, to a data scientist, somebody who loves data, I love data. I mean, more data sounds great. I'd love to have more data, just keep feeding me data. But then when you really start to look at it, you're like, holy crap, this is a lot of data. What do I do with this? Where do I start with this? And, and going from one perspective, the data scientist to the, to the social media marketer and everything in between and beyond. I mean, there's different amounts of data that are right for the different people. And I think, one of the things that we try to do or try to understand is, for each one of these personas at different points of that customer life cycle, what's the right amount of data for that person? How much predictive capabilities do we need to build into that data to push insights and data insights out to you so you can understand, what is this data actually telling me, and then you can take action on it. So I think from a Adobe product perspective, we're having to look at a lot of different types of personas and having to architect our products and build our products and interfaces to facilitate all different types of people within the organization.
So Alex, I mean, you mentioned about the accuracy of that information as well. I mean, when do you get that confidence level? Is it do you have a threshold or something? And how do you?
99.9.
Yeah.
No. I think so. That you start to have to ask that same question with respect to the models, and I think that's the challenge. So there's the statistical world where you have that, what's the probability, what's the confidence level, but then there's the part where you can take tribal knowledge of folks that have been in the industry for a long time, and I think that's the part that's going to help get the pendulum to shift before we even get a massive gold standards of KPIs. And it's how do you build out a set of models, and I'll go back, you guys are gonna get sick of hearing me saying this, that has a nice balance between statistical and practical significance, and allows me to ask certain questions of the modeling structure in such a way that I'm getting back information or signal that has practical sense to me, that helps underneath to drive the statistical significance. But it's not that you're starting out a conversation around statistical significance. It's saying practically how are a set of customers or consumers behaving, building the appropriate class of models underneath that. And then again, striking that fine balance between statistical and practical significance, because I think, as we all know, the decay rate on information is very, very high. So even I can say has something statistically significant. I think nowadays it's for how long.
Mhm.
How long is that significant for? And how much data do I need to continue to bring in? And what type of data do I need to bring in to recalibrate my model so that this remains relevant and is reflective of the signals hitting my consumers or potential consumers? And then how do I use that in a targeting way to kind of capture that consumer surplus, whether it be from a pricing, a product, or a placement perspective?
Mhm.
One thing for us, I mean, for our firm, I mean, being actionable and what's actionable is very different, I think, than the other gentleman up here, in that we deal a lot with attitudinal data and not behavioral data. And for us, what we're doing is we're testing material before it ever even gets to market. And then it gets measured in terms of how many people are viewing it or liking it, in which case we're then panned out to be correct or absolutely wrong. And, you know, using attitudinal data is very different in that we're asking people questions about what they think of something, and on a large scale, on a national scale, it has to be representative data. You know, one thing I found out, you know, leaving academia a long time ago, I was a statistics professor, and I come over to the entertainment industry and find out nobody speaks quant. And so, you know, they're working on understanding a crosstab, and I'm trying to speak regression, and it doesn't really match. But what they really want to know is, would this work? And, you know, this trailer, this TV commercial, this movie, this TV show, what is the likelihood that this show is going to have long-term success, for example? And how do you base that answer? Well, you know, traditionally, a lot of people want to use it. There'll be like collective gasp here, like focus groups, right? I mean, like 20 people, you know, where we're saying, no, let's survey 2,000 people across the country. And even that might not be as significant. And then how do you people lie, right? I mean, when you ask them what they want to do, they don't intentionally lie. I don't mean that, but, you know, we're definitely interested in doing everything. So what's the likelihood of someone following through on that? So from our perspective, it's almost entirely predictive, and everything we're trying to do is to predict something before it actually gets out to the market. And then we do some measurement on the success of the marketing campaign, which is where I think there's a lot of synergy here. And I have to do this when I say synergy every time, because it's like the right business thing to do. You say synergy like that, but I think there is. So, yeah.
And I just from to bring it out to like specific projects and specific use cases. So I think, as a TV network or a studio or as a publisher, let's talk predictive, right? So there's some specific thing that predictive will help you with. If you're a movie theater, you want to predict box office sales for the next 6 months, so you can, you know, maybe allocate your marketing spend or decide what movies to put in what theaters so you can optimize supply and demand. If you're a TV company selling ad sales, you want to try to predict ratings on new pilots coming up front, so you don't have to sell upfronts 12 months before. You can do that 2-3 weeks before and optimize your revenue you're getting for ad sales, right? So I think once you figure out those high priority use cases, then you go to somebody that is, you know, does data modeling. And the wonderful thing, as he said, is there's a bunch of tools out there, right? And there doesn't have to be this social digital versus, you know, traditional panel-based data argument. It's all about what he would say, getting features into the model that have predictive power, right? And so there's kind of an iterative process there. And I can tell you that I've been, you know, being kind of a neutral person, been on the big data side. People are saying, no, you know, even in marketing, digital and social variables are super predictive. Somebody mentioned before how, you know, social sentiment did not, 1 week predicted something, and then after it kind of flopped, it wasn't very predictive. But I can tell you, once you get into the modeling process, you kind of do a discovery process. Let's say you're trying to predict box office. You're a movie theater in China, and you're trying to predict box office. I can tell you that, you know, in many cases, the social sentiment, these variables that traditional statistical people that are used to using panel data will poo-poo and get scared of because they think the data quality is bad. How could you infer something from something that's inferred 3 times already using other technology? But the nice thing is you start putting these KPIs and metrics in a model, and then these modeling tools will spit out and tell you, at least statistically, what's significant, what's not, and you can start to iterate and play on that. And also, you know, you may statistically know that a model has high predictive power, but then there's the practical side of, okay, let's start making predictions every week, and let's do that for 6 months, right? And then you can start to see, wow, this stuff is accurate, and then you can get your marketing teams and other people to buy into it, right? So you have to take a more practical approach depending on who the audience is within the company. You don't talk about R squared and statistical things in the model. You talk about actual predictions and what happened and what your margin of error was week over week, right? Without getting into all the model fit and other things. And so I think all these things live side by side. side. The good news is you can extract variables from big data using text analytics and other tools, and then you can create these cool variables or features that go into these models. And you can continue to use your traditional panel-based models as well, right? You can use your Nielsen ratings side by side with a social sentiment score. Just put it in a tool, see what happens, right?
I think it's also how far out can you predict? So for example, like I can tell you right now that, okay, John Wick will open to $10.5 million this weekend. But could have I told you that 6 months ago? Could have I told you that a year ago when it was at maybe script stage, when someone was deciding they're going to put in $30 million into production on it? Well, that's of course the golden, that's what everyone tries to strive for. Can you predict farther and farther out? Because the farther and farther out you can predict with accuracy, that's when you can make real actionable decisions, and one of the things that we're focused on is predicting even at the script stage of can you say John Wick would do $10.5 million on opening weekend a year and a half ago. So the closer you get to prediction, I mean, the Friday before a movie opens, I mean, you could pretty much prognosticate. Most people can get pretty close to it, but the farther out you go, the more valuable that prediction becomes.
Right. And to that point, it depends who the customer is, right? So if you're trying to green light movies, you need to know that information. But if you're adjusting your digital media marketing spend and you can make accurate predictions 8 or 10 weeks before a movie opens or a TV show comes out, then it could be useful. But that's absolutely true. It's a lot harder to do things, the farther out you are.
And you talked about the maturity of, I think we talked about broadcasters earlier, but film, I would say, is definitely more mature in the time of they're looking at what the sentiment might be of their product or their actors or their storyline or whatever. I'm not sure that television's necessarily got as far as film has in the consumer understanding in that regard. I mean, is that something you're seeing? I don't want to mention names specifically because I used to work for a broadcaster, so I don't want to call them out. But I know that my boss used to walk in with an ink marker and write on the wall how many hits we got on our website every month, and it was 500 million a month. It was an incredible number, but they weren't using this 360 view yet. They didn't have and they owned Omniture, they owned NetBase, they owned all of these different tools to give them that view, but they haven't got a culture necessarily of analytics, like a brand or a retailer or whoever that has to know their consumers. So it's part of the culture challenge.
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends on the company, but in general, actually, I've experienced a bit of the opposite lately, which is
it's happening this year for sure.
Yeah, TV networks all of a sudden have access to all this data that either they get from their cable providers that want to do cross promotions with them, or from their first party TV Anywhere applications. And so, assuming you tag it, you collect it, and organize it from your, then you can potentially leverage it to do things like, segmentation on your audience, or whatever. Actually, studios typically would have less access to data, right? As a studio, you're at arm's length, kind of like a book publisher. You're selling through other people, but so one of the things studios do, as well as TV networks and book publishers now, are use a lot of these social sentiment or digital analytics tools to analyze their first party websites, or extract things from text that people are saying on the social sphere and creating variables out of that. So I think it kind of depends on the company, but
it's definitely got more. You're absolutely right. I mean, I've been at SAP 3 years, so in that 3 years, there's absolutely been a drive towards understanding the consumer. But as I said, the discipline almost is just culturally still evolving. I mean, we talked about HBO earlier. I mean, clearly there is that switch starting to happen now, where the companies realize that they've got so much more information that they can get from the 10% that they can't get from the 90% today. So albeit that they can say, yes, this movie's been watched, or this TV show is successful based upon Nielsen ratings, they don't necessarily know this person X has got this interest here or that. So that definitely is on the rise, and I think that's the shift that we're seeing between the companies who do a deal with Comcast or whatever to carry their stuff, and that's it. That's the only way you can get it, which was HBO forever. But that's like a significant shift, literally, in the last week that we're seeing. And so from a privacy perspective, as technology is allowing marketers to combine so many data sets, how do you navigate those murky waters of privacy regulations and restrictions? Europe recently granted the right to forget rule Will the US government ever touch privacy? I mean, if you're balding slowly and you don't want the advertisers to know that you might be interested in Rogaine, I mean, is the right to forget something that, you know, should be, or do you think that, you know, the US is just not going to go there for whatever reasons? So, you know, privacy is something which...
Yeah, sure. Certainly from PwC, it's happy to talk about privacy. But I think more important, when you ask that question, is the government going to do it? Quite frankly, I think the consumer is going to do it. I think the consumer is going to make that happen. When you think about, you've heard of your carbon footprint, but what do you think about your digital footprint? When you think about your digital footprint that's out there, of all the different places you've put your name, your stamp, your digital image out there, and the ethics and morality that is out there to help govern the integrity of your data and the inferences being made from that, I think it's an important question. And I think we're only at the start of that type of thinking really starting to play in. Of course, I mean, when I work with a client, of course, we have the appropriate NDAs in place, but NDAs, like a piece of paper, can be burnt with a match. And we've all seen all the issues with data privacy, right? From top government, there's a wonderful website called Information is Beautiful. And it shows the largest data breaches, and you go through that, and I said, holy cow, I have an account with almost every one of these. And some of them are really, really old, which is, I'm really old. But the point being is it going to happen? I think it is. And I was recently speaking out at Oxford, and they're bringing these types of classes actually into the MBA program out there as they produce new data science and data scientists coming out, and this idea of grabbing more data. What is the moral responsibility of owning that data, and what are we really doing with that data and the marginal benefit of that data, and what does it do to us from a brand perspective, and the insights that we really need are to get to our consumers or to capture more consumers, and then how do we structure that data, or how do we graveyard that data once we've gleaned the information we need? Because it's very easy and cheap to store information, but once you've made a mistake and that information is out, you can do all the prescriptive activities you want, but you've already had the damage to your brand. So I think a next wave of that will be coming. I think it's out there today. We hear about it, but I think the consumer is going to demand it.
I think it's gotten a lot more challenging too lately. You know, in the past, whenever we were focusing on marketing just on a single channel, you know, it was fairly easy to understand where your constraints were, and you know where the walls were, how far you could push that envelope. And now that we're talking about, you know, all these multiple screens, and you know the second screens, and mobile and desktop and application, all these different areas where you're interacting with these consumers. Now we're start talking about combining data, you know, data from an anonymous state on a you know website with an authenticated state on a mobile application. You know, we start to combine all of this, and the question of morality becomes a lot stronger in that case, because as marketers, we all want to push that envelope and get as close to that line as we possibly can. The challenge is nobody knows where that line is right now. There hasn't been enough precedent out there to say this is where the line is, this is how far you can go without pushing it, you know. And I think, you know, all of us from a technology perspective, we're staying really close to those conversations. We're on, you know, the boards trying to make sure that we're helping guide and shape that to be a win-win for the consumer as well as the publishers and the marketers, because as a consumer, I want to see relevant advertising. You know, I think there's definitely a win-win there, and we need to figure out where that line is and make sure that we allow, you know, from Adobe's perspective, allow our customers to push that line as far as they possibly can without breaching that line and getting yourselves in trouble. So it's a much more complex question these days than it was, you know, 5 years ago.
And I agree that when you said that the market itself will also regulate this, and so will consumers. I mean, there's a reason you don't see as many pop-up ads anymore as you used to, because they were intrusive and they don't work. If marketing isn't working because people find it intrusive or people find that it's violating their private, then there's going to be pushback on it. And nobody, I mean, there isn't any company that's going to go ahead and push forward something that clearly isn't working or isn't getting, you know, positive consumer response to it. But there's also a consumer responsibility too, and a certain degree of common sense that needs to be used. I mean, the digital space is a public space, you know, just like out here, we're in a public space, and what you do can be observed by other people. And it's not like the message of, you know, what you do online is embedded there and can be used, hasn't gone out there. I mean, people are aware of it, but there are those fine lines. But I do think that the market will regulate those lines themselves, as people will push back whenever they're crossed.
Yeah, I think this issue, like any other issue, right? Ignorance breeds fear. And I think we're definitely still in the ignorant phase. And what I mean by that, there's like 3 tactical things that typically happens to come through something like this. And first is technology, right? So everybody, I mean, go to Germany, go to France, there's politicians are passing laws now. From a technology standpoint, there's ways to protect, strip out personal information. So technology companies and media companies need to get together and figure out, okay, what are the ways we can optimize our business objectives, targeted marketing, but still have a data privacy and data governance, because everybody does these projects, but last thing they think about is data governance typically, right? Because it's like, oh, let's get to the ROI real quick. Data governance isn't exactly a sexy, exciting thing, right? But there are ways to think about this stuff and build out this stuff, right? And that's education internally, that's between technology companies and media companies, and then out to the public on that. The second thing is, I think that basically people, as you said, people themselves, I mean, want smarter and more targeted advertising and all this stuff. And I think as younger consumers don't seem to care, right? The opt-in is what I wanted to say. Opt-in is critical, right? So I've noticed a lot of companies being very transparent about their opt-in policies, what data is used, not like buried 70 pages into terms and conditions, but starting to educate the consumer about opt-in. And you look at your younger demographics, those that are doing it, everybody's opting in, right? Because they know they're going to get a better experience. And so you can use opt-in and transparency as a way around that as well. And also a way around a lot of the regulation. And then the third is just around PR and marketing. I mean, media companies, I mean, the big scary, movie studio is going to try to sell you another movie versus the NSA. We tend, when I go and speak in places around the world, media companies tend to get bundled in with the NSA and other government companies, and really there's a big difference, right? So that's for the industry to start, positioning and marketing itself appropriately. But it's all around transparency and education, from the technical stuff to what we're doing with the data to the PR stuff, and I think that's going to help us get through this.
Cool, great. So we're approaching the end, folks. Has anyone got any questions from the audience that you want to ask these folks while they're here? Yes, please.
How fast are you on your feet to input into your data structure national events that will affect the market?
That's a really good question. And one of the I guess projects that we're developing is a media mix modeling project. So it's about taking all of these inputs, so not only your behavioral inputs and your third-party inputs, but building all of this media mix model and saying, here's our return, and also having the triggers in there to say, here's the GDP, here's all these different metrics that we can input from outside events that might have an influence on that. So it's an emerging area. It's something that we haven't productized yet, but we do have some working prototypes to show how that actually works.
I was just going to say, events I classify as just potentially another feature, right? Another data variable you can put into a model. So it depends in media mix or marketing mix, whether political events, some tragedy, an earthquake, other things. These things could be potentially very significant, people shopping or not. But it really depends. If you're talking about, predicting ratings on sports, on a sports TV show, well, then maybe who's winning and not winning, historically may help impact that. So I think events in general as another data source and can be wonderfully predictive. You think about political polling and advertising, right? Grabbing some big data reaction to certain events in the market or political events, as opposed to polling, that may be something that's useful to predict. I
think also short term and long term, right? I mean, right now we'll look at a potential project about, I don't know, let's just say an infectious disease spreading across the globe movie very differently than we might have looked at it 3-4 weeks ago. But will it affect movie going this weekend? Well, doubtfully, no. It's not going to have an effect on whether or not people are in a movie theater unless something drastically bad happens. So there's you take into account sometimes national events both reveal something about the public that you're trying to predict, or suggest a different trend that might resonate one way or the other. And it's really agnostic in terms of of, you know, most of the time when you talk about national events, you're not talking about something positive either, right? I mean, there's very rarely, oh, look at this great thing that just happened that's going to affect something. It's usually some natural disaster or a war or something else like that. And then it's sort of, well, how does that change the mindset of people? And how does that affect your previous models on what you thought they were going to do compared to what they'll do now?
Did you want to say something as well, Richard?
No, I was just laughing because about the negative versus positive depends what country you live in. There's a lot of positive press that's forced down people's throat in other countries that impacts behavior. But yeah, but you're right.
We actually saw with the NFL, you know, the whole concussion scandal with the NFL, and we did a sentiment analysis on that, and we saw complete flatline on social media. Nobody was talking about concussion of football on social media. I mean, nobody, literally nobody. But the media, it was 100%. It was all the chatter that was coming from the networks that were choosing to talk about it. So I think to your point.
The one thing I wanted to add to that is I think in general, when you use any kind of data modeling, can't grab every variable. And so there need to be humans, you know, looking at it, especially in the early days. In the early days of financial trading, you know, no one was executing a $10 million trade without checking to make sure the CFO quit, you know, 3 minutes ago. And that's not in the model. And so we probably shouldn't buy that company. And so one analogy I once heard, it's not perfect, is, you know, build a fighter airplane, not a robot. Right. So the fighter airplane, you know, there's a human there, and the humans with the machines, you know, are doing better than just like a robot would do on their own. For things that become routine, you can get every single variable you need into the model. You don't worry about it. You let it, you let those things roll. But the bigger the bet, or the newer the area, you're going to want people looking at the model.
The death of a star would definitely affect you.
Yeah.
Sure. Any other questions from the audience?
Question regarding the inputs to, for example, things like skill sets and tools when you start calculating ROI of like, is this worth it to me as a business owner?
Right. So skill sets in doing this type of work, is that what you're saying? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So something that we're challenged with, I'm always challenged with, even on my teams, and as we build our teams, it's one thing to have the strats and the quants guys kind of there to build the models, but it's also bringing along good financial modelers, and I think that's the marriage that needs to be there. That I see at many of my clients that they are lacking. So it's being able to have those small integrated teams that can take the outputs from whether it be a piece of work that we do, or take it from a tool, or some combination therein. Now go back and being able to build the appropriate financial models, as pro forma as it may be, to be able to say, does this make statistical sense and business sense? And more of our clients are starting to ask us, well, how do we build these groups? How do we build these skill sets? Wait a minute, let's take a step back. I speak at a lot of different universities. You have universities that are trying to do this. That's fundamentally changing their academic curriculum from MIT to Stanford to Oxford to London School of Economics to Chicago. They're fundamentally changing their programs, and they have these data science programs within MBA programs, quant MBA programs, that now have this marriage between good financial modeling as well as that data science modeling, because it's a skill set that's kind of rare air out there, which I see a lot of our clients struggling with. But I think that, to answer your question, hopefully it's those multidisciplinary teams that the stats people aren't just talking about R squared, and the finance people just aren't talking about ROI, but they're malleable enough in their mindset to bring those two together to say, how do we think creatively about this new data environment that we're in, this new modeling environment we're in, and quite frankly, the new expectation from our customers, and how are we building products and services around that?
I would expect this to be a contributing factor to the pace at which the business culture changes.
Yes.
Yeah, I think, every single client I go to see the same issue, right? And people are different on the segment. People are at different levels in the horse race ahead of each other in terms of skills and capabilities, like financial services ahead. But if we talk about media and M&E, point number one, business case is critical for any business, right? And a lot of times I've seen a lot of companies go too far and hire a bunch of data scientists and technical capabilities that don't understand how to apply it in the business domain. So they do, quote unquote, a bunch of science experiments, may pick the wrong use case that's not going to have a return, and then the thing sort of dies and goes away. Or vice versa. It's a bunch of business folks that think everything is possible and don't ever get down to a data scientist. So typically, always, first thing out of the gate, always think about what are your target use case, how are you going to apply analytics, and you can start actually building out a business case for that. The problem is you don't know what you don't know, and you can't build assumptions in a business case or an IR model that you don't know you're actually going to get out of a data science project. So you actually have to do some kind of proof of concept. And right now, what most people do is go externally and hire consulting companies, and all the consulting companies are building up their practices right now. Just like when the internet came out, you didn't build your own website. You went out and hired Scient, Viant, PwC, whoever you were hiring. Same thing with advanced analytics right now. But over time, you're going to want to build those capabilities internally, right? And so there's 4 key people to a multidisciplinary team. There is the number one, absolutely most important, and I'm going to put it ahead of the data scientists, which is the business domain expert. If you don't, we mentioned the fighter pilot. If you don't have that fighter pilot, machine learning, you still got to train the data, right? Text analytics, predictive analytics, you need people that understand what is actual consumer behavior based on my 25 years of experience to marketing movies or marketing TV shows. All that knowledge gets transferred into what are the data variables that go into a model. So that's person number one. Person number two, you need a data scientist, right? You need somebody that can use these tools and do text analytics and do predictive modeling, do statistical modeling. That's the person that makes the magic happen, right? And so those are kind of 2 critical ones. But then once you do these projects, how do you integrate them into the business? So you need your regular application developers, right? People that actually build reporting applications or integrate the models into some kind of real-time marketing engine. So you need your developers and application developers that you traditionally have, right? And then fourth, I'm going to mention them, but I think systems operations people, are you deploying this in the cloud? How are you getting all this stuff done on a hardware standpoint, right? People like supporting the environment, whether it's externally, internally. And so, so you need all these skills to be built within a company. But the question is, where do you get the ROI to justify them, right? So the hardest part is like those first couple steps to find that, let's call it the killer app, the killer use case, right? That actually justifies the ROI. And then you can go back and build the financial models and take it to the board and say, okay, we found it, right? Programmatic advertising is the thing we want to invest in, or whatever it might be.
I think and the one thing I'd say is I think most of the time, not all the time, a simple math formula can get you like 80% of the lift of a complex model. And so what I mean by that, and this will find you your ROI, let's say that you've got stores and they're open all the time, and you do it, you've got that person, the analyst at your company, says, wow, nobody's buying anything after like 5 p.m. So let's not keep our store open until 8. And you close a little bit earlier. And then you found that drove real business revenues. Okay, that's step one. Step two then would be applying a detailed big data model to really help you decide throughout the day how you're going to staff people and where you're going to staff them. But you basically took something that was like simple and was able to get lift out of it, and then you can apply the model to get the rest of the lift. And I just see that all of the time. The mistake sometimes people make is they're not doing any optimization, and then they want to do this big data project to get there, and they've never even really tried a little bit on their own, so they're not clear about lift and you can get lift, with a simple formula, and then you go big afterwards.
Cool. Any other questions from the audience?
Yeah, one over there.
Got one over here. Great. Thank you, please.
I'm not sure I know how to phrase it. In school, I was a geneticist and molecular biologist. Somehow moved to marketing. But in school, I knew that any test we did, we had to show a 95% statistical significance. Otherwise, there's no point even saying yes or no. In the marketing world, it's always confused me. Is there a level of statistical significance before you can say that, yes, this trailer will produce this much? Do you have to be certain by 75%? Or in the marketing world, is that as important?
Yes and no. It depends on who your client is, and it depends on what their objective is, right? I've seen decisions made off of a sample size of 75 people with an error range of 11.3%, and they're looking at it and it's 5% better than the other trailer. And I'm like, well, that's not significant. It doesn't matter, because everybody in the creative department of that studio loves trailer A, and it just happened to have won. So you know what? We don't care about significance. It's 5% better, so we're going to go with that. Well, but if you test it tomorrow, it could be the other. Doesn't matter. They don't want to hear that. So we're not splicing DNA to your thing in terms of like, if you get it wrong, no one's going to die. You're just going to have a slightly worse trailer out there. But you know, over time, it does prove out that the problem is also to get real statistical significance is expensive. I mean, it costs money, which means your research budgets have to be commensurate with. You actually want to get a representative, large enough sample to be able to show that the information that I'm seeing is representative of the audience that I'm trying to connect to. And a lot of times what it is the information I'm seeing resonating with the argument I'm trying to make to my president of marketing, and does it support it? Because if it doesn't, I'm going to hide the information. If it does, I'm going to put it forth on the Monday morning meeting. And so there's a lot of politics, no matter what, that goes into it, which is why, back to the earlier question, in terms of skill set, you also need people in the company that speak the language of the industry you're in. I've actually seen very, very good data and analytic companies pitch their services to studios. And I've heard studio heads and heads of marketing go, they don't speak our language. I don't care if they're right. They'll drive me crazy on the phone every day. Get them out of here. And they're amazing. They're great, but they don't speak the language, right? So it's a combination of knowing the politics involved, the industry that you're in, and the science that you're putting forth. And at the end of the day, if you don't put forth the best information that you can just have to caveat it as much as you can. Caveat it, say, this is not significant. This is not, enter as your own peril, move forward at your own risk, etc.
Yeah, just real quick on that, with the whole statistical significance piece, again, one of the things where we've evolved to in the analytics space, you may not be able to get the appropriate sample size or the control and test groups, but you may have it for certain groups, or cohorts is the word we like to use. But now mathematically you can do simulation to simulate behaviors to start to cross the chasm between statistical significance and practical significance. There was a time that computationally and just the intellectual capital that was out there to acquire and use was very difficult to get. Coming from doing work in kind of pharmacovigilance background, that's that clinical trial thinking. But can I still have stable parameter estimates at an 80% confidence level? Can I? Yeah, I might be able to. Can I extrapolate practical behavior and how that evolves through my customer groups? I may be able to do that. If I can work on that fine balance, and I can often tell a very compelling story, even when I don't have the 95% confidence level, right? So I think that's the world that we live in. Yeah.
All right. Anyone else? Any final comments? Okay. Any room for one more question if someone's got one? Yeah.
I work in podcasting/broadcasting, which is having the most questions about marketing right now, especially because for ours, there's not a lot of big data or specific targeting stuff. Like, do you have any advice on what data we should be looking for? Or like, is there some kind of basic data that that everyone should have that's like a basic standard? Like, if you don't have this, we can't take you seriously kind of thing.
I'll put my neck out there. I come from an Italian family. I'm always used to getting whack on that anyway. So is there a so if I'm understanding you correctly, coming from a podcasting, is there a gold standard of data that you should be going after?
Well, kind of, because that industry doesn't have like podcasting. There's no way to monitor.
Right. Right. Well, so to me, if I was to, if we were working together and you were asking me how I'd go about it, rather than saying what kind of data do I need, I'd say, what are the business problems I'm trying to solve? And then against the backdrop of the business problems I'm trying to solve, what are the data sources that are available to me? And then how will I collect that? Is it focus groups? Is it social listening? Is it third-party data? Is it first-party data? And against the hypotheses I'm trying to solve, it'll help me say, okay, where do I start to spend budget? And some of it may be a diversified portfolio of skill sets, of data acquisition and modeling that might be very small. Look, when we were acquired by PwC, I started an analytics group with 4 people with $100,000 that went from acquiring data, skill sets, to a group now that's well over 200 people, along with a data factory underneath it. But at the onset of it is, what are the problems we're trying to solve for our clients? For you, it's what are we trying to answer about the customer, about content, or about the marriage between the two? that makes us intelligent. And from there, that's how I would build my platform. That's just me.
That was great.
There's a terrific company out there called AppAnnie.com, like the woman's name Annie, App Annie. They track mobile installs with a bunch of intelligence, and there's some free analytics there. They do books, like how many people are downloading ebooks. I don't think they do podcasts, but I just kind of keep track on them. I'm sure they'll add that at some point.
Great. Well, folks, we're actually out of time, but if you can join me and thank our panelists. Thanks for coming. Appreciate it. Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. 50 minutes.
Yeah.
Right.
You know,
Hi.
us data people,
Who I am.
we're precise.
Lynn.
Yes, we don't waste time.
All right.
If you were a lot older, you recognize that name. I worked with Dr. Warner.
Dr. Warner. Oh, yeah. Absolutely. How could I not? Right?
We're trying to do more and more in gaming anyway.
Like,